At one point I was working 3 jobs to be able to live here and afford to, to do the things that I wanted to do. But I got really involved in volunteering and started going to different events and started giving my time. I didn't have a lot of talent, I guess, at that point. I didn't have a lot of experience in those kinds of things, but I had a very willing spirit. And I always knew that if I worked hard enough and long enough, that good things would happen. So I started getting involved in the community, started volunteering, started spending time with people who knew much more than I did. And I learned from those people. And Dad had always said to me, never be the smartest person in the room, because then you can't learn, right?
Yeah.
And so I would seek out people that knew a lot more than me and could help me to grow. And so the more I got involved and the more I spent time with people, I learned that all of that was building not only the life I wanted, but the community that I wanted to live in and the community that the other volunteers wanted to live in. And so I did that for 15 years and loved every minute of it. Had once in a lifetime experiences because of my volunteerism here in northern New Brunswick. And then last year I decided to run for city council. So here I am a year later.
Okay, so I wanna insert here. This is because I wrote so many things down. Everything that last bit, Veronique, what you just said is so rich with really great statements that I connect to, that I'm strongly tethered to. So one of the questions I want to ask you says that expectation of you volunteering started at a young age because your parents were heavily into that activity themselves. Was there any how did that expectation make you feel to do something like that at an early age? Was it at all like stressful because it's foreign, or how did that feel to have that expectation from your parents to say, hey, guess what, kid, you're going to be a part of this?
Yeah, I mean, it probably, I was never a shy kid, right? I've always had the same, open personality, I guess we'll call it. So I didn't worry so much from that perspective, but I did have those feelings of how am I going to do this, or how am I going to, you know, I'm not good at whatever it is. Like, how am I going to get involved? Are they really going to need what I have to offer? And I came to realize very quickly that, yeah, every organization, didn't matter what I was involved with, needed whatever it was that I could offer, whether it was just the fact that I showed up, and did some work or took tickets or whatever it may be. And one of the first first areas that I volunteered in. So as I said, I volunteered when I was 6 at the Special Olympics in Montreal. So mom was teaching in Montreal, dad was military, so we were living in Montreal, and mom was teaching at a school, a wonderful school for kids with disabilities. And they were all part of the Summer Olympics. And I was handing out McDonald's juice. Like, that's what a 6-year-old did, right? And
Yeah.
not a critical aspect of anything, but my gosh, it was fun. And that's what I remember, was that I had a good time, and I got that kind of that feeling of, not pride, because it for me, it's not about being proud, although it's given me some of the proudest moments of of my life when I volunteered. But I remember being 6 and being, number one, crispy burnt because we were out in the sun all day. Um, but also realizing, and that's what I realized more and more, was how lucky I was. I had a wonderful family that loved me that did things with me. So it wasn't all about things that they gave me, because back then mom was a teacher and dad was in the military. We didn't have a lot of money. We moved around a lot, but I had wonderful experiences. And it also taught me that those experiences are the things that I cherish the most. And that's what I usually seek to do now, even, is that I have enough stuff. I've got a great house, and I have lots of stuff, but I'm always hungry for more experiences. And that was the beginning of it. So,
Yeah.
it really, it opened my eyes to that feeling of, wow, this is so cool. I get to do this.
That is awesome. Yeah, naturally it helps. I mean, I have one daughter who's, I guess, same personality as you, the youngest, and she's just open to everything, volunteers for everything, puts her hand up for everything, loves public speaking. And I'm like, that wasn't me as a kid. So certainly it makes it easier for your personality type at that age to be open to such things. Now, I want to bring it back to your mom. You said something that I'm more curious about. And when she was talking to you about her time in volunteering and giving of yourself, what I call selflessness, right? That selflessness. And this is where I'm always curious about. Your mom's comment was she shared with you what it did for her. Because oftentimes when we think of volunteering, it's like, oh, look at me, I'm volunteering, I'm giving of my time, I'm giving. But is there any reciprocity in there? What, because sometimes people give to a fault where
Yeah.
they end up not looking after themselves, right? So I'm curious, what kind of things did your mom share with you as what it did for her?
Yeah, so so much of that revolved around knowing that we had a good life, right? That we were lucky, and because we were lucky in our circumstances, meaning that we had, a positive, wonderful. Both my parents worked, and we were able to have each other and spend time with each other. We were healthy, all of that. It gave her, and then by consequence me, an opportunity to um, help to be part of a solution for those who didn't have all of those things, right? And or that may not get to experience the same things that we did or do. I have been incredibly fortunate in my life to travel the world because of what my dad did for a living in his second career. So having seen in countries like Sudan and others what actual day to day struggle to survive looks like, it really it changed the way that I look at, you know what what hardships might be in my life. But with volunteering, it became all about um, improving the lives of the people around her and me and us, and dad's the same, and that feeling of not only do I get to have a great life and be lucky, but I get to have an impact on somebody else's life and make it a
Mhm.
little bit better. And you can't always do that, but you can't always. People think that money oftentimes is what people are looking for when they're struggling, right?
Right.
They're looking for more money, and absolutely,
Yeah.
there's no question that money eases a lot of our burdens. But sometimes they just need, an ear or support or a fun event to take, your mind off things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I used to think sometimes, "Oh, I'm just volunteering, and it's a pancake breakfast or it's a Dragon Boat festival, and I'm not changing the world." But you know what? For a little bit of time, these people got to experience and enjoy something that normally wouldn't come here, or normally they wouldn't be a part of, and they can build some memories just like I get to build those memories. So it became a lot about finding satisfaction in regular life without it having to be a material need that's filled.
Yeah. And that's that captures something else that you said that's always been kind of intrinsic with me from a very young age, is that yearning to belong to something bigger than self. Now, not everybody experiences it that, like in that internally at the same level. Some people, it's a little bit, or some people have a great need for a sense of contribution. And I always have. I get an amazing amount of satisfaction over just like you said, listening to someone if that's what they need, or hey, I need a little bit of advice or perspective, or can you kind of coach me through something, and you help open some doors. And so when you said that, needing to belong to something bigger than self is those are rewards that money can't buy you. I mean, money can't buy you such experiences. And you said, you use a word that I'm a big fan of. Earlier, you said you intentionally built the life that you have today. It's a powerful word. It's part of actually of our three pillars in our culture for our organization, the organization that I work for. So when we went to do a huge rebranding, we were like, here's about 100 different words we can try and use to kind of create pillars or a culture. And intentional was one. So if you are inclined to share a little bit about what that distinction is to intentionally, because some people may go, what does that mean? Because that's not easy to be intentional. And the way I see it, Veronique, is a lot of people and myself, oftentimes through life, I would just kind of meander and wander and think that things would just get me to where I would like to be and what I've created in my mind, versus it doesn't work that way. You have to intentionally. So I'm going to turn it over to you. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it took a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
It took a lot of hard work. And when I was leaving Ottawa, I mean, I had a great job in Ottawa, and I had good friends, and did volunteer a little bit in Ottawa. But in Ottawa, you kind of get lost in that shuffle, right? You might be one of thousands of volunteers at an event, which is still meaningful and it's still important, but it wasn't the impact that I wanted. And so when I moved home, you know, um, I wanted to be part of a community where, I knew my neighbors, if I needed help or if they needed help, then you were just a phone call away. And you don't get that same feeling sometimes in big cities like Ottawa, although I do find Ottawa, closer to that feeling than other cities that I've lived in. But when I moved home, I started looking around and seeing what I thought, I wanted to be part of. But I also, at the time, was teaching high school. And so I got to get their perspective on what they thought was missing in our community. And so I taught high school for a couple of years here, and I
Wow.
I loved it, absolutely adored teaching high school, because their perspective on life is fascinating, and you can learn a lot from high school kids. And I probably learned more from them than they did from me. And so I started listening to them, and seeing what they felt like was missing here, because the culture here for the longest time was you finished high school, and then you moved away, right?
Right.
That was
Yeah.
that was the only option to really experience life, was to move away from Miramichi. And I didn't want that to be the case anymore, and I didn't know how I was gonna do that. But so I started listening, and then I started getting involved in some of the things that I found really interesting, and some of the organizations that I found interesting, and started listening there again. And I really put some thought into what I wanted next. And it was never, a 10-year goal or 20-year goal. It's like, what do I want to do in the next year? How do I want to feel at the end of that year? And where do I want to get to? And so then I would do things that would get me there, because just like at work, um, when you're trying to get that promotion, or you're trying to, make advancement in your career, whatever it may be, you really think about what's going to get me there. What courses do I need to take? What jobs do I need to take on? What skills do I need to learn in order to get to that next step? So it was the same thing in my personal life. How was I going to be a part of this community? And what was I going to get involved in that would get me there?
Mm.
So along the way, I got to have a whole lot of fun, and I got to learn a whole lot. But it really, I worked hard, and I think sometimes people forget what happens with volunteers is that, especially with events, the event is phenomenal, and that weekend or that event or that day or whatever is so much fun. But usually the volunteers have spent hundreds of hours getting that event ready.
Yes.
It's not just the day of.
Yeah.
And it taught me about budgeting, and it taught me about um, strategic planning, and it taught me about governmental relations and having to work with different funding partners. And all of those events taught me about networking and building bridges, and trying to figure out what the win-win situation was for the organization and for whoever it was that we were looking for to partner with. So all of those things came from volunteering, right? And I worked with engineers, I worked with doctors and teachers and lawyers and all sorts of people who would teach me a new skill over the last 16 years. And you know, and it really, it helped me to grow, but it also brought new things here to the region. And city council was part of that long before I joined city council, because I've only been a city councilor now for a year. But city council was part of that because they get involved in those events, and they get the feedback from the community, and those events also help our businesses because they bring people to the area who
Yeah.
spend money.
Yeah.
So it really, it when I decided that I wanted to be part of something, I was all in. And I knew, again, that if I worked hard enough and long enough, good things would come.
And that's a great message. And I want to layer a little bit more on living intentionally. So I'm interested in knowing if your experience with committing to living intentionally was the same as mine. And when I would start looking at that part of my life, and I knew that in order for me to be happy in the way that, in my skin and myself, and what makes me me, what turns me on, what makes me excited, what makes me feel fulfilled, it required courage. I found that it needed a lot of courage because, for anybody who's listening, it's kind of like taking a hard look in the mirror of where you're at, your current state versus your ideal state. And you go, what's the gap? And what do I need to fill in that gap in order to get to that ideal state? And a lot of times it's some very, very honest conversations about just some of the things you've been doing to keep yourself distracted, from those real genuine things that make you happy, because we shrink away, we shy away from reaching out on those things because we feel like we're going to fail in the process, or somebody's going to come along and tell you it's not possible, you can't do it, it doesn't exist, and all this good stuff. So I found it, Nick, that when I had to think intentionally, I had to find the courage in order to also execute. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrifying, right? It's terrifying because I had to really look and say, so, what do you want? And the skills that you currently have. And I had some amazing career moments before I came home, but what skills do you have, and how are you gonna make those better? The other thing that was really hard for me, and it wouldn't seem like it would be, but was really hard for me at the time, is I was coming home to a family that was exceptionally well known, and really pillars of the community, very active in the community. And I didn't want to just be another one of like, I didn't want people to feel like I was riding on their coattails. And so I actually worked a little bit harder to carve out that space for myself,
Mm,
right? To really say, this is me. And yes, I am so, so stinking proud of my family and so amazed by everything that they do every day. But their success is their success, and this is mine, right? This
mm,
is,
mm.
I worked for this life that I have. And part of that sometimes that can be a challenge is I've been single for most of that time, right? And so as a single woman, it presents its own challenges, right? And so it I had to get really comfortable with going places by myself and doing things on my own. And even just like the most recent trip where I went back to Ottawa, like I road trip to Ottawa. And I remember along the way so many people saying to me where I'd stop, for the night and do some adventure somewhere. Mostly women would say to me, "You're on your own?" And I'd be like,
Wow,
"Yeah."
really?
Yeah, like I remember going to an excursion. I was at Camp Fortune, wonderful place. You
Yeah,
kind of bobsled down on this
yeah.
little track, right? Fantastic, had a great time. But I remember the lady, that lovely lady, wonderful customer service, incredible. But I remember her saying to me, "You're so brave. You're here by yourself." I'm like, "Yeah, no, I'm good." Because
It,
if I waited, I,
yeah.
I would never do any of this stuff, right? So I mean, I've dated over the years, but I've just been really a single woman for most of the last 16 years. So I had to get really comfortable with going places by myself and
Yeah.
taking on new challenges by myself because I have wonderful friends, I have great family, but I don't have that life partner with me, to go places with.
That's a very inspiring message. Yeah, and I've had a lot of conversations with people over the years who have been on their own and single, and they talk about that's a journey in itself, especially if you've had somebody in your life or companion for a long time, and learning to
Mhm.
learning to live and explore and experience on your own. And there's a lot of beauty in that too, and that's maybe for another show. Now,
Mhm.
the other thing for me that I found, that Nick, with moments of starting to live intentionally, is I started to deviate from patterns that I've created in long established relationships, not only on like the intimate side, it's a person in life and friends and especially family, because you start putting yourself first. And I found I started saying no for the first time to some things. And of course, you learn some people's true colors the first time they hear no come out of your mouth. That's another
Mhm.
interesting phenomena. And so there was that I had to adjust, because people were like, well, you're changing the context and the pattern of our relationship and what the norm is, because now Steph is starting to do things for himself and on his own, and not saying yes at the drop of a hat when somebody needed me, let's say. So did you find that was a bit of a shift in some the relationships you may have had, or even expectations of you, when you started to kind of intentionally address your life?
Yeah, it was a challenge at times, and I will say this, over the years as I have dated, my life is not for everyone, right? It's especially in a community like ours where most times I leave the house and run, there is nowhere that I go that I don't run into people that I know. But that was on purpose. That was part of the reason why I wanted to live here. Um, but that life isn't for everybody, right? And I've had relationships where where my the man that I was dating would say, I don't want to do that. Like either you can go to everything for the rest of our lives by yourself, or you can stay home with me, right? And I kind of went, option number three. We're gonna go with, I think we just need to end this now. And he was like, yeah, you're right. So, like, that was a challenge as well, right? In saying, this is my life, and I want someone to come into it and be part of it, and me be part of theirs. Um, but living a life like mine where I'm fairly public with just about everything is not what everybody wants to do, and I totally understand that. And
Yeah.
when I started to change a little bit that relationship as well, where, okay, so we're not, I'm not going to do everything all the time, then it became, I worried that people would say, well, then we're just not going to call her for anything, right? Or we're not going to get her involved, or we're not going to reach out to her. And that was, I built my identity here around being part of stuff. So it took a little bit for me to really find that balance and those boundaries that made me comfortable and happy, but still gave me the opportunity to be part of all the things that I wanted to be part of. And when I joined city council last year, it gave me actually an opportunity to focus a little bit more on that future planning for, the city, and for our partners, and how we were going to evolve from here. And that was what I really saw as the next step in my journey. I got to be part in bringing a whole bunch of things here over the last 16 years. And now I got to start planning for what could come, or what we could be as a community, so that people didn't have to leave anymore after high school, that they could build that life that they wanted here.
Wow. That, very cool stuff. My mind is going in a million different directions with what you're saying, and I try to kind of pick what I think is cool. It is thinking about the word engagement, because we started with community engagement, and I love the word engagement, what it means, because I consider myself to be a very engaging person.
Yep.
Always have been. And what I would say the word's not struggle, bit, Nick. I think it's more I don't know. I guess it's more disappointed in a way, as I find people have become less and less engaged. At least what I've witnessed in the last 10 years. I think before we got on live, we're talking about technology, and there's a good side, and there's the bad side. And I find with technology and with phones and everything else, people are just less engaged. And where I'm going with this is, what the show is about is, and what your volunteering does and being engaged in the community, you're trying to inspire more engagement from the community that you're in, whether it's the community that you're living in, whether it's your community at work, etc. And for me, at work, I work very, very hard to create a high level of engagement within the team, within the different personalities. So I don't sit behind my desk very much. You know, I don't, people will email like texting and I'll just like, you're two doors down from me. So hi, how you doing? Hi there, Nick. Say, I got your email, da, da, da. And one of the senior project managers there, he made me laugh one day. He goes, all I see is you moving around, walking. I'm walking. I go, yeah. I said, I got to get my steps in, you know? And I said, but other than that, I go, isn't it nice to see each other face to face? And he's like, yes, yes, it is. So it means a lot to me, and I need it. I need that high level of engagement, and clearly you're out there to try and inspire that in your community. So I find that like very, very commendable, and it takes a lot of selflessness, takes a lot of energy, because I know every day I don't have the same level, but then I always look to find it, because back to what it means to give of yourself, what it gives back to me is a high level of satisfaction that I showed up. And that's what I want to be known for. Is like, hey, he shows up, he brings his half. So I think this is a good segue into your next theme that it's a natural dovetail into when you're talking about community engagement. We talked about, you know, living our lives intentionally and getting it into doing it scared. Do it scared. Do it as a newbie. Do it anyway. When I read that, I was smiling ear to ear. I just do it. It's like one of those great mantras, even if Nike, you know, coined it. But yep. I really want to learn more about that part.
Well, so what comes with being incredibly public with your life, right, is some of the most amazing moments, but also failing quite publicly as well, right? and that
yeah, I suppose.
is tough. Like, it's not, you know, I mean, we don't set out to do that, but I mean, it is tough when that happens, especially when everybody gets to watch it. And I went through, you know, I always wanted to open my own business. That was always a part of what I had hoped to do with my life. I had worked for nonprofits for most of my career, and especially since after I moved here. So I taught for the first 2 years I was home, and then and at the same time was working for a nonprofit, and then went into the nonprofit world for a lot of years. And but I decided, you know, I found the perfect business, and you know, had managed businesses, other people's businesses for a lot of years, and so thought I was really ready to do that, and was so excited. I bought a restaurant, and like, restaurant life is a hard life, and I firmly believe that everybody in their lifetime should have to work either in the retail sector or the restaurant sector
100%.
for an amount of time to really understand how hard that work is and how hard that life is. So anyway, very excitedly opened a restaurant in 2013, and within the first 6 weeks, we had a fire, a flood, and an explosion.
Oh, wow.
And so the flood shut us down for 5 weeks, which was most of the summer months at that point, because we had just opened Mother's Day weekend, which is the worst weekend ever to open for a restaurant, because it is the busiest weekend. So anyway, we survived it. It was, you know, but and then subsequently had 2 more floods after that, 2 years in the following 2 years. So my business was, I loved so many parts of it, but it was also something that nearly killed me, quite literally. Like, it took a huge toll on me, you know, mentally and physically at the time, and I learned an incredible amount. So we had some really bad luck, no question. I made some terrible mistakes as well, and all of those things combined ended up that 3 years later I closed the restaurant, and and that was really where my mental health journey started for the first time, because up until then I had been really one of those people that no matter what it was, I knew that when I went to bed and woke up tomorrow morning, I will have figured it out by tomorrow morning. So there was never a question in my mind that I was going to get through whatever it was that we were thinking or doing or moving through, until then. And you know, I was going through an incredibly difficult time. I was hemorrhaging money from both, my parents were supporting the restaurant, and from myself, and just really everything was tough. And then at the same time decided to take a run in politics. So neither one of those things worked. And there I was in my head, failing spectacularly and very, very publicly. And at one point I thought, how am I gonna get through this, right? And then so not long after that, so we were in the second year of the restaurant, I decided that I needed to get a job in order to try and supplement the restaurant a bit. I'll never forget the feeling. And this is where it comes, the do it scared, right? And do it anyway. So I will never forget the feeling. One of the local hotels here was the beautiful hotel, the Rod Hotel, is incredible. And I got a job at the front desk. And I was working nights. So I was working days in the restaurant, and then I would go in at the end of the day, and I would work overnight, or not overnight, but late nights on the front desk. And I remember my first week, we had the Hospital Foundation Gala, which I always went to, was in the first week that I was working. So there I was, behind the counter, having failed spectacularly in everything I had just done. And everybody that I normally would, be colleagues and peers and whatever, all enjoying this event. And I wanted to crawl under the front desk.
Oh,
like
wow.
my confidence, my self-worth, everything was in the sub basement, not just the basement, but it was in the sub basement, right? But I was able to, and what I take from that now is I was able to take that ego that we all have, right?
Yeah.
And put it aside enough to say, I'm terrified, but what do I have to do here? How am I going to get through the next day or the next whatever? And what mattered most to me at the time was keeping my employees employed at the restaurant. So I would work nights at the Rod. My salary would go back into the restaurant just to make sure that we were getting all the bills paid. And I'll never forget that feeling. But the hotel was amazing. They supported me. They encouraged me. They gave me great skills. And it was the first time really that I had started to kind of see a light at the end of the tunnel. Not that I was going to get through. It took another 3 years before I would get through the bulk of the worst from the restaurant. But at least I knew somebody was there and had given me a chance, so that I could start to rebuild again. And so that kind of it helped a bit in giving me that opportunity to say, okay, I didn't die doing this. As much as I wanted to crawl under the desk, I made it. So what's the next thing? How am I going to get through the next thing? And it really helped to cement that in the back of my head to do it anyway. And that's evolved so much through my life. And now, so I developed anxiety at the time. And again, go back to the fact that I had always been one of those people that didn't understand anxiety, didn't understand how someone could feel despair, didn't understand, because I always knew that tomorrow I'll figure it out, whatever it is, and really developed severe anxiety, and would have go on to have daily panic attacks for 9 months, and severe ones. And then I found coping mechanisms, and I found ways to not avoid my triggers, but recognize them and work through them. And now I haven't had a panic attack in years now. It's been years, because I know enough about myself to really be mindful of what might make me feel anxious. The other thing, though, I realized from that was the power of words, right? So what's an anxiety attack, or anxiety versus nervous? We use anxiety a lot to describe everything, right? When we might normally, or might be feeling nervous, and appropriately so. And so it really, that helped me to work through the do it anyway and do it scared, right? And so it really, those things have led me to experience life like I never imagined. You know, and I think I take from that, although I wish it hadn't gone through all that. I still wish that I hadn't had that, you know, 9 months of anxiety and that feeling and having to learn through it. It has given me an opportunity to really embrace the things that make me feel nervous and appropriately so, but still to do them
Oh,
anyway. I said a lot there.
no, yeah, I no, just I'm just taking it all in, to be completely genuine with you. Like I'm an emotional guy, and I'm very emotional about that last piece you shared. Um, I deal with anxiety every day. I've always had a lot of anxiety in my life. When I've shared that with people, you know, openly, they kind of look at me twice and they go, "No, not you. That's impossible because you present so strongly, so confidently." And I go,
Absolutely.
"You don't know what I internalize. You don't know what my internal narrative is. And some days I'm vibrating at a frequency that's very, very high, and I'm having to do everything I can to deal with those triggers and the things that I've developed for myself to manage them. And there's so much what was a compliment that you said was, you know, you said, you know, I go to bed at night and I didn't worry because I knew by the morning I'd have it all figured out. And then you went through your situation with your restaurant, everything that you outlined there. And that, I'm gathering, if I'm correct, that was like a moment in life that felt insurmountable, which then what I would think being having anxiety would have inspired this anxiety that you never had in your life. And that's what typically it is. Like when the triggers, like it feels insurmountable. Then the anxiety becomes gripping. I've had some serious panic attacks as well throughout my life, and
Mhm.
you know, there's a lot of people out there who deal with anxiety at one level or another. But if you've never experienced a real panic attack, let me tell you, it's hard to put into words. Um, and the other thing you touched on that you know is important to me is kind of like you said when you were at the hotel, you were kind of on the other side of the aisle or the experience, right? And how
Mhm.
you must have felt. And I put myself in your shoes and I was like, oh man, I feel that. Oh man, that must have been really tough to just swallow, like to just push through and do it. And then you did it anyway, which is part of the theme you're talking about. And but the moral of the story out of that I took away is how supportive they were of you, you know, who you were working for, and how much they were giving you some of the things that you needed where you were in your life. And that must feel good for going right to the beginning of the show, for having started volunteering at the age of 6 and giving of yourself. But it's also be able to receive that gift from others when you need it, right? And I wanted to touch on that because I'm still I receive better today than I think, but I've always been very resistant to it. I'm happy to give the shirt off my back, but I'm not so ready to take it. So it was great that you were open to that when you needed it. And the other part you said is, you know, managing those triggers, and I'd be interested also as well to talk a little bit about some of those tools that you have that you've developed, because I'm sure anybody who's listening to this show who would struggle with anxiety would be like, hey, I'd like to hear more. That's entirely up to you. But I'm almost done this book called Becoming Bulletproof. It's an audio book. It's really quite special. And the author, she says, you know, learning to kill fear while it's small. And I was like, right? Like learning to kill fear while it's small instead of feeding it and letting it grow into this uncontrollable beast. And it's funny that you're talking about this today, because yesterday I saw a meme that said, when you're depressed, you're living in the past. When you're anxious, you're living in the future. And I just thought that was absolutely brilliant, because for me, that rings true.
Mhm.
Is if you're living in the moment and you're not thinking about the bad stuff that happened in the past, well, you're not going to be as or feeling as a depression, because you're living in the now and you're focusing on now. And if you're always worrying about what's around the corner, that's me. Even to this day, I'm always up the next thing, the next thing, the future, the future, the future. So I have to work very hard at it to be in the present. I really do. Gotten better, but anyway, I just really and the other thing I wrote down is the retail restaurant. 100% amen. I've said it before. I
Yeah.
started in restaurant business in busboy at 15 at the Holiday Inn there. That used to be the Chimo Hotel, and then got into retail. And let me tell you, you have to either develop a very thick skin, the skills that you develop as far as dealing with all kinds of personalities
Yeah.
becomes very invaluable as you move through different careers, especially if you're going to be working and dealing with people. So anyway, I love that bit that you brought that up. So as far as mitigating and hedging against some of the anxiety, come-ons or triggers, like what are some of the things that you developed for yourself over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. And I carried a lot of guilt for a long time, right, around the restaurant, and I was solely responsible for 12 people that worked for me at the time, and it was such a heavy responsibility for me because they were, young moms or university students or single dads or whatever it may be, and they absolutely needed every dollar that they brought in. And so when the restaurant wasn't working the way that it should be, and I carried that, and I carried the guilt too around my parents and how much, in their 70s, they should be enjoying life, not working at midnight in a catering gig in a restaurant, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it was heavy for me. It was really heavy, and I remember the first panic attack I had, and I didn't have panic attacks the way that um, you see them in the movies, right? Where in a corner, rocking back and forth, hysterical. I didn't typically have panic attacks that way, although my first one, didn't know what it was at the time, was that. I was driving actually to a business meeting in PEI, which is a 3-hour drive from here, and could not stop crying for the entire 3 hours. And I remember mom and dad calling me every 20 minutes to see how I was doing and where I was and, what was going on with me, because none of us really had any real experience with mental health at that time. We didn't really know anybody because nobody talks about it, right? And so I didn't know what to say to them. And funny enough, at that time, when I was working for the Rod, although I was working on the front desk, they actually moved me into a second position, so I would split my time in sales for them, in corporate sales, and then at the front desk. So I would do part and part, which started to build that confidence again in me. And so I was heading to business meetings at head office, and I remember I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do with myself, and so that was my very first one, and then they came daily after that for about 9 months. And triggers for me tended to be um, around money, to be honest. So, I couldn't get the bills paid. How was I gonna make payroll? How was I gonna get food in the restaurant to cook? How was I gonna pay my parents back? I was draining them both physically, mentally, and financially. Was draining myself at the time as well. So, and it became daily, of course, because there's bills due
Yeah.
every day,
Yeah.
right? And I got so I would sleep about 2, maybe 3 hours a night,
Wow.
and so that made it so much worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I got another job, 2 hours away. I became the training manager for the Tourism Association for New Brunswick, and so I moved to Fredericton, and it was more money at the time, but really, when I look back on it now, I think, well, I had to pay rent in Fredericton, and I had to pay mortgage back here. And so, yeah, I was making more money, but was it really balancing out? Probably not. I was living 3 days in Fredericton, 4 days home. So I would drive home to work catering events on the weekends and things like that. But what I started doing, and it did help, but again, I was living in this little motel in Fredericton because that's all I could find. And at one point I just thought, how is this my life? How
Yeah.
is this where I'm at? Right.
Yeah.
But listen, it was a clean spot to live, and it was what I could find at that time. But when I would start to feel that panic coming, and for me, it was that pure ball of dread that would sit in the middle of my chest. And I was fundamentally convinced that something bad was coming at
Yeah.
any moment.
Yeah.
and it would just sit there, right? I didn't have the racing heart. I didn't have the, can't get out of bed. I didn't have a lot of things that you would typically associate with a panic attack. It would just sit there and it would be crushing. And, but what I found, and it's going to sound dumb, but what I found for me is that I needed to be able to focus on something enough where I had to make a small decision without having to make a life or death decision or an important business decision, to be able to focus my mind. So I would play Candy Crush.
Yeah.
And it just, you have to focus long enough to find the next move to make, right? To make, and the pretty colors and the noises if you want them or whatever. So I would play Candy Crush, and it would take me out of my mind, right? It would stop the constant buzzing and panic that I was feeling. So because I love to read all of my life, but I was not able to focus enough to read.
Yeah.
And I found it stressful then to read because I couldn't settle down enough. Right. And I couldn't watch TV. That was hard. So I would play Candy Crush. And that was the first thing that really helped me slow down. But I mean, I would have panic attacks, and I've heard the same thing that you have, Steph. I would have panic attacks on the air on our TV show, and nobody would know. Right? Because I would be like, I would be interviewing a guest, and I would be sitting there having a conversation, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, you're so happy. You're so great. Everything's wonderful." And I'm like, yeah, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
Sure. Let's go with that.
Yeah. And I'm glad that the viewers are seeing it as such.
Yeah.
not the shit show that's happening internally right now.
Or people would say, "Oh, you can't have anxiety. You're so happy."
Right.
Right.
There's another
Sure.
statement. Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, you have such a great life. What do you have to be stressed about?"
Uh-huh.
Right. So I found that even tougher because I was then constantly having to be on show, basically.
Yeah.
When that wasn't what was going on inside, right? So Candy Crush was the first one. The other thing that I did is I have this, and I'm not a journaler, like, I don't like to sit and write, but I did actually, and I still have it, and I look at it, and sometimes it'll make me really sad sometimes to look at, because I'm like, oh boy, you were pretty dark then. But what I would do is I would sit at the end of the day and say, okay, what was good today? Like, what did you think that came out of your day that was good? Some days it was that I found a good parking spot, right? Some days it was that I got bananas that were ripe for 3 days, like it really and when I look at those days, I'm like, wow, you were struggling, like if the best thing that I could come up with that day was that I got a good parking spot, where was my mind, right? And so, but it made me focus, right?
Yeah.
It made me focus on finding something that I could be positive about in a sea in my mind that was not positive. And I struggled with the burden that was on mom and dad, because mom particularly had to listen to me in those moments where I could not keep it together, and at a time when she should have been enjoying mom was still working. Mom and dad worked until they were 75, and and they loved it. But at a time when she should have been enjoying her senior years, she was, dealing with her only daughter, her only child, struggling through an incredible amount of weight and darkness. And so it took me a long time to get past that part, more than anything. And it took me, the real turning point, though, I will say, is that in 2016, so we had opened the restaurant in 2013. I closed the doors on December 31st, 2015. So just about 3 years. And then set about trying to pay off all of the debt that I had accumulated over those 3 years. And, the flood, insurance didn't cover it at the time because we had only been open for 6 weeks. And so they need a year's worth of business to be able to, mitigate what had happened, and the flood cost me 80 grand
Wow.
out of pocket. You know,
Wow.
I never recovered from that, and so we hemorrhaged money after that. So it took me until 2 years ago, actually, to finally pay off all of the debt that we had accumulated, to pay off my parents, to pay to really feel like I had closed that chapter. And but then in 2016, it was interesting. There's a women's empowerment network here that is made up of local businesswomen and professionals. And every year they had a gala where they would have an entrepreneur of the year and a professional of the year, and they have what's called a woman of influence. And so my aunt that I had talked about earlier, that was such a reason why I moved home, had been named the woman of influence a couple of years before me. And anyway, so I was nominated and named in 2016 as the woman of influence for the Women's Network. And
Nice.
it was really the first moment where I started to feel like I was not the all of my failure, right? Because that's all I
Mm.
could see up until
Mhm.
that moment. And I remember that being a real turning moment in finding myself again and being able to let go of some of the stuff that had happened over the last number of years. And then I started working on those things. Like I said, I would journal and say, okay, today I found a great parking spot, or I got to see an old friend today, or whatever it may be. And then I really started thinking about the power of words. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, where, am I having an anxiety attack, or am I nervous? Instead of saying, there's another word that I took out of my vocabulary, and that's the word just. So I often would say, I'm just a front desk clerk,
Mm.
or I'm just, this. I've taken that out of my vocabulary almost entirely, because I'm not just something. I am absolutely. I worked that front desk and it saved me, and I don't say that lightly. And I, I, you give away your power when you use the word just, because whatever it is that you're doing right now, and in the federal government, there's a lot of what they call acting opportunities. So you might be in a position, but you get to act in a higher position for a period of time. And so we often would hear, "I'm just an acting team lead," or "I'm just an acting manager." Well, in that moment, like, I was the manager. I was making the decisions. I was making, doing all of the work that needed to be done. I wasn't just. I was. And so I took that word out of my vocabulary to kind of boot my head into that, you know, what you're doing is important, and and it matters, and you're not just, you're absolutely.
It's very clear to me, and it makes complete sense as to why they chose you as a woman of influence. Because just everything that you're sharing here with me today is not only what I call a gift, but it's very influential in what you are sharing. And there's a bunch of notes I made. So from what you shared, it's exhausting to have to be asked to tread water for so long. It's exhausting, and that's how I look at it. It's treading water and taking on water, and sometimes swallowing a lot of water and choking. And in the years of having to deal with what you faced as a trigger, which is money, and I connected that. I understand that, because money was a terrible thing from an early age. As a child, it was always looming in our house for different reasons, and so it was never a positive thing in my life, and it was always a very, very negative thing. So that was a very big trigger for me as well, Veronique. And the when you highlighted what your panic attack looked like, sounded like, and felt like, it was very similar to me. And the first thing that came to mind when you said, was the uncontrollable crying. I remember watching the movie Analyze This with Robert De Niro, where he was just crying at a TV commercial. I think it was some kind of insurance commercial. He was crying inconsolably, and it was validating for me. Even though it was a movie, I'm like, those were my first panic attacks. Is I
Yeah.
would just be crying uncontrollably and thinking to myself, I don't understand where this is coming from and why it's so intense. So I appreciated you sharing that with me. The other thing is, talking about the money, is you're saying it's always there, right? It was always in your face. every single day. It wasn't like, oh, okay, this week is a reprieve and everything. I can kind of exhale a bit and then get my second win for the next thing. And it's always in your face. And it's like, how am I going to get past it? So I can appreciate the amount of stress and duress that must have given you. And then you were ending off with like the power of words. Now you're speaking to someone who absolutely loves the dictionary. I love the thesaurus. I was a weird kid. I used to lock myself in my bedroom. I remember being 13 years old because outside of the bedroom door, which just always World War III in our house, so refuge in your bedroom, at least for a period of time. And I would open up the dictionary randomly to a page. I close my eyes and I would put my finger on a page, and whatever that word was, I would write it down and try and use it in 2 sentences. And I would do 10 words every evening, right?
Cool.
And the reason why, and I really want to hitch my wagon to your just, which is a very powerful thing to me that you said, because I had a very hard time expressing myself. I had a lot of pain. I had a lot of emotional, difficulties. And the only way you're able to get past that is having the ability to express exactly how you're feeling. So if I had more than just one word to be able to describe how I'm feeling, and it literally affects your physiology too, right? And where I had the first exposure to that was Anthony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within, when he talks about self-talk. It's like, oh, I'm starving versus I'm a little peckish. Or, it really pisses me off when you do that versus, it irks me when you do that, right? The words that we use impact our, not only physiology, but how we react emotionally to something. So when you shared that I was just sitting on that. I was just sitting on that. And I was like, man, that's beautiful, because it really, you put yourself in a state of minimizing yourself, minimizing your value, minimizing where you are in your life and what you're doing. You're standing tall, you're making it happen, you're working towards your goals, intentionally trying to move through and past where you are to get to that ideal state, right? So I love that last bit, Nick. I really think this is a great message to anybody who will be listening to the show. So awesome. So as far as more for doing it scared, doing it as a newbie, doing it anyway, is there anything currently on your list? I don't like calling it a bucket list or anything like that.
I don't either.
Is there anything on your list that, gives you a little bit of the heebie-jeebies in the sense of, out of your comfort zone, but you're like, I'm just going to do it anyway?
Yeah, and the last number of years, particularly, it was really 2018 where I developed a hashtag for my year, and 2018 was my year of experiences, and so I had decided at that time that I just wanted to do stuff with people that I loved, with friends and family, and that was one of the years where, and I've also come to grips with the fact that I can always make more money, right? So I've got a good job and I work hard. And if I have to get another job, then I will. Right. So I there's a lot of things that I've just figured, I'll book it and figure it out. And so but 2018 was that first year that I really decided I was gonna do things that scared me. I'm not a thrill seeker by nature. I don't want to do things that, I can't even imagine like going skydiving and things like that, although I probably will at some point. For some reason that's there. But I decided in 2018 I was just going to do stuff, and I did. Every month in 2018 I had something new that I did, whatever it may be, some new adventure. And one of them was doing the Edge Walk at the CN Tower in Toronto. And I actually had a panic attack that time.
Oh man.
Although, and so I was up there with my girlfriends and one of my girlfriend's husbands, and God love Shane because he puts up with us, and I don't know how he does it, but anyway, two of my girlfriends and I went up to go see Def Leppard, Journey, Peter Frampton. Amazing concert, one of the best I've ever seen. Yeah,
I
absolutely loved it. And but in the meantime, so Kara says, I want to do the Edge Walk. In my head, what that meant was the inside with the glass floor, right? A week before is when I actually figured out what it was, which was the outside of the building
Oh,
hooked
wow.
on. And so by then I had told everybody I was going to do it. So I, couldn't go back at that point. Right. So anyway, we go up and they breathalyze you. They, hook you in 6 ways to Sunday. It's like really amazing the safety protocols that are in place. But we go up and you can actually, so I have a video of it. You can actually see me having a full blown panic attack on the edge of the building. Right. And then I'll add this piece there. 20-year-old Jack was locked in behind me. So there's 6 of us walking around the building, and 20-year-old Jack is locked in behind me. You never know who is going to be influential in your life. Okay. So we're up there, and the first thing is you have to lean over and, wave to everybody on the street. Right. And you're like a cajillion feet in the air. And so I'm having, panic attack. And then the next thing is you have to lean back, which is the big iconic thing on the CN Tower. So I'm hyperventilating. I'm, can't breathe. And the girls, the tour lady is trying to talk me through it. And I'm like, no. So then I stand up and everybody else is doing it. And then we start walking and they say, like, we're going to do these activities as you walk around the CN Tower. So then one of the activities, and I don't know why this one didn't seem scarier than the other one, was you had to lean out forwards. For whatever reason, that seemed okay. So I did that. And so, we lean back and we're walking again. And then Jack, the 20-year-old behind me, starts saying, Vero, like, because everybody calls me Vero. So he's like, what can I call you? I said, Vero. And he goes, Vero, he said, like, you can do this. Like, you just did the lean out. He said, I only did the lean out because you did. He gave me a pep talk for 20 minutes as we walked around the outside of the building. And so at the end, when the big pictures are, I was able to do it. And I've got these amazing pictures with my girlfriends and by myself. And, and in my head, like, I'm still hanging onto the rope, like that's going to save me. Couldn't let go. Didn't matter. But Jack, the 20-year-old behind me, biggest influence in my life in a long time, because he gave me such a pep talk as I walked around the edge of that building hanging from a rope, that he changed my life, really.
Wow.
And so anyway, year of experiences, had an amazing time, whatever. That has carried on through my life. 2019, I went ziplining in Vegas down Fremont Street. That was amazing. I had another panic attack as I was going up the building. Had my 70-some-year-old father with me, and he's like, Dad's jumped out of planes. Dad's done all this stuff, right? And he says, are you going to be okay? I'm like, no, I don't think so. I don't think I can do this. And so they strap us all in, and the dad says to the guy, like, she's not doing well. Can we get out? And the guy goes, nope, it's the button, off I go.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
It was the best thing I ever did. I'm like, yes, this is awesome. And like, but those two things combined have really, so of course, was I having anxiety or was I nervous? And appropriately so. In that case, I was having anxiety. But going up the side of the building, I was actually nervous, and appropriately so, because I was about to hang 11 stories off of the cement by a rope, right? So it changed my life. And so same thing, I was in Ottawa not too long ago, of course, for our reunion, went ziplining across, from Ottawa to Gatineau, loved it, and that's become a thing now for me. But the things that I want to do, like even just the drive up to Ottawa on my own, and I never used to think about it. I used to do it all the time. I used to drive back and forth. But leaving here, at the ripe old age of 49 now, on my own, I'm never alone. I've always got somebody with me, either for work or, mom lives with me now or whatever it may be. So just even taking off on my own with having no, set schedule, except that I knew that the week after I had to be at the reunion on the Saturday night, really was scary in some ways, but also just so amazingly fun. And I got to do whatever I wanted everywhere I went, Montmorency Falls in Quebec City. I got to spend some time there and climb 480 steps up the side of the mountain, which I'm quite terrified of heights. So the fact that I did it, I was like, yep, awesome. Dad and I are going to do the army run in September in Ottawa, and that's nice. 10K. Training for that was a big deal. I'm not a runner. Well, right now I am.
Wow, and exactly right. Here you are. And, so the edge walk, the zip line, and your time alone, all things that can create a little bit of discomfort or a lot of discomfort, not just a little bit of
Yeah.
discomfort. And what's interesting, they're all moments of growth, instantaneous growth, right? Moving forward is difficult, falling back is instantaneous. And from the examples you've shared, I find it's amazing at times what we can accomplish or move past when we feel a little bit paralyzed or something we wouldn't consider, depending on who we're surrounded with and who we're doing it with, right? So you have that
Hmm.
20-year-old young man who's there giving you a pep talk, who's literally walking you through and being there every step of the way to see you out
Yeah.
the other side. And then you're like, wow, this was great. Now, different circumstances, maybe to do it on your own or with other people, maybe it would have been a different outcome. Same thing,
Yeah.
with the zip line. The guy didn't give you an opportunity to think about it.
Nope.
Away you go, Vero.
I know, like he just hit the button and that was it. No second thought. I'm like, whoa.
And that story reminds me just quickly, just to share, because the first time I went bungee jumping was in the West Edmonton Mall. I was 21 years old. I was visiting an airborne friend that I met in Ottawa, and then he got stationed to Grease Spa. And I used to live in Edmonton in Lancaster Park, so I'm like, hey, I'm going to revisit my junior high school, all that good stuff. So this guy was a Seahawk. So for him with the bungee jump, it was like whatever. He does flips out of a back of a Hercules in the air before he pulls a chute. So he
Mhm.
indulged me and he goes, let's go bungee jump. And it was over the wave pool. And we climb all these stairs, we get to the top. And it's these two Australian guys, young guys, and the music's, I think it was AC/DC blaring. It was just like, rock and roll, just trying to get people in the mood. And it was just my friend Chris and I were up there. Guy's eating a sandwich. He's all calm, and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna be jumping off this skinny little platform into some like water, like because you can ask if you want to get dumped, right, or just short of. I said, yeah, I'm all in, right. So we asked the guy. I said, you know, he goes, yeah, he goes, where it started, Nick, was he says, if you don't jump, we give you opportunities to jump. You don't jump, it's a full refund. We'll give you your money back. That's how we work. I'm like, hey, that's cool, fair enough, right? And I'm like, well, I really want to do this. So my buddy Chris goes, is there anybody that ever like doesn't jump and you kind of help them out? And I'm like, and then the two Aussie guys look at each other, eh? With this shit eating grin on their face. I'm like, oh no. He
Yeah.
goes, okay, we're gonna tell you a story. Okay. So we had a young guy come up here. He was about 17. And he came up here on a dare, right? He says, oh yeah, you won't bungee jump, you won't bungee jump. And when you look down at the wave pool, you can see all the people in their inner tubes looking up at people ready to jump. So they're all your audience, right? So, long story short, so the kid gets up to the platform, and what they do is they go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, jump. And they say you can jump any time between 5 to jump, right? So if you want to jump on 4, away you go. So it says young guy's up there as a platform, and you can tell like he's just shaking, and they're like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He's like, doesn't go. So this happens 3 times, and then the two Aussies said, "Hey, buddy, you don't have to jump, no problem. I'll give you your money back." He goes, guys, you don't understand. He goes, "I'll never live this down. All my friends are down there. They're watching me. They're like, okay." So they look at each other, like, all right, because I think this is it. I think you're going to be able to do it this time. So okay, so he's like 5, 4. You push him in his back, and he's just flaming in the air.
Oh,
He came back up. He loved it so much he jumped a second time on his own. So
you're
sometimes,
kidding.
like on the cusp tagline says, the nudge you've been dying for. So
Yeah, and good for him to have done it then on his own because I can't even imagine. I don't. I say I want to go bungee jumping, but I'm not sure I'm there yet. But and just for people thinking that like I don't just do things like you know, that are like those thrill seeking experiences
yeah,
because there's a ton of other things that I'm, terrified of doing that I have also done. I got to act in a play a couple of years ago, which was I always wanted to, but didn't think I'd be able to, and ended up in a two-woman play with a girlfriend of mine, which was a phenomenal experience. But it can be something as simple as something I did while I was in Ottawa. And I used to live in Ottawa, of course, as I said, and I used to live downtown and I worked downtown. So I would walk to work, and on my walk to work, I would see all of these people running along the canal, right? And I always thought, like, who do you have to be? Like, what kind of person do you have to be good enough to run along the canal, right? To be that disciplined and to be in that great of shape and to have all the gear and to, and to do it every morning and, rain or shine. And I kept thinking, I'm never going to be that person. Like, I'm not a runner. I don't enjoy it. I don't get the high from it. I find it fascinating. I do it every day because it gets me, the fitness that I'm looking for, but it's not a thing that I love. So I kept thinking, I don't understand how people do this. Right. So anyway, I started running a couple of years ago. So while I was in Ottawa, I wanted to go running on the canal because that, like, to me meant that I had achieved something. And I did it. It was as hot as it was, like 38 degrees that day,
Oh,
and I don't know why I picked that day, but anyway. But I felt as much satisfaction from that as I did from, going ziplining in Vegas. That was more fun, to be honest, but, I
yeah.
felt that satisfaction, and I think, when I talk about living my life out loud, especially in my 40s, I don't feel like I'm in my 40s. I don't feel like I'm gonna be 50 in a couple of months. But because I know I have so much that I have left to do and enjoy and experience and get to be part of, my friends and their lives and their kids' lives and all of that, like, I'm so excited about what's coming, and I'm so excited about what I get to do every day. And the life that I have and the life that I've built. Are there pieces missing? Of course. Of course I wish I had a life partner, but that's okay right now. That's not where it's at, because I still have so many other amazing things in my life, and they're not all death defying. They're not all hanging off, the CN Tower. But they all mean the same. They all do the same thing for me, which is give me that incredible satisfaction and feeling of having accomplished something.
And I'm glad you went there as far as distinctions between, like, people think, oh, going outside your comfort zone is doing something absolutely batshit crazy, like thrill seeking or parachuting or
Hmm.
ziplining or bungee jumping. And
Hmm.
I'll have, and some people are very natural. I have no problem standing up on a ledge and doing whatever. That's in their DNA. And you're like, wow, good for you. Right. But
Yeah.
the things that scare us, the thing that like move us, can be simple things. Like you talk about being in a play and doing that. Right. Or for a lot of people, public speaking, right? Public speaking. And then,
Absolutely.
I do a lot of coaching. I had another full day session on Friday for new leaders and organizations. So I'm the one who does all that coaching, kind of preparing them for their new roles and what it all means to be a leader. And, people always say, wow, you're so good. You're so confident. I go, I had to work on that. I had to work on put myself in that situation over and over and over again in different ways, right? And I think on one show I was talking about when I was great one-on-one with people when I was a strength and conditioning coach. And the idea of trying to do a group class or a boot camp terrified me. I'm like, I don't know if I can manage and lead that. Well, I put myself into that situation. And like you said, it was such a moment of feeling of accomplishment for which means for Steph equals exhilarating.
Hmm.
And I love when I feel exhilarated. I just love that feeling. And then he's just, okay, I want to do more of that. So he did a natural segue into living out loud in your 40s. And you're hanging on to 49. Some of us, we're already there. Um, but I know when I hit my 40s, there was some interesting changes, some shifts in myself emotionally, how I would see the world, how I would even react to situations or people. I ended up shedding some of the anxieties that I used to carry. They just eroded away. They were no longer there. And it was just more kind of like, I don't care as much. Now, do you experience anything like that during your 40s? Is that kind of part of the package about being able to live out loud and go on, I don't care what people think. I don't care if people are watching or judging. It's all about me and whatever.
Well, it's a weird thing. So I still think I'm 32. Not,
Good. Nice. Good for you.
not because I'm like have this desire to intentionally lie about my age, because I tell everybody that I'm 49. Like, I don't care. But in my head, I'm still 32, right? And so 32, like, oh my God, you can do whatever you want when you're 32, right? So that's what's there, and
Okay.
that's what I operate with. And I still think, like, look at all these things I've accomplished before the age of 32, but in actual fact, I'm 49, right? So I don't. It's a it's something that's kind of held. And when I was in my 30s, I thought I was 26. So there's whatever's going on in there. It just kind of stops at some certain point in my life. I don't know if it's because that year was a really good year. It doesn't stand out that way, but it just seems to me like I had a lot of life to live, and make it good. Like I've watched my parents and, mom's 78, dad's 76, and they have continued to live their life, into their 70s, and we're blessed that mom and dad were very healthy for a lot of those years. Mom not so much right now, but dad is still healthier than most 30-year-olds
Wow.
and was still running around working full time up until 2 years ago. He was a security specialist for the United Nations up until 2 years ago.
Wow.
And it, that's what I have in my life as role models, is that my life, I'm not middle-aged. I am still living a life, and I will for the next 30, 40 years if I can. So I don't get stuck in the fact that sometimes I have a little sometimes I have a little twinge. I'm about to be 50 and I'm like, 50, God, 50 is old. Like, because when you're young, right? Like when you're in your teens, you're like 50. Oh,
Oh yeah.
so I have moments of that, but not because I think that my life is, um, you know, that I'm supposed to slow down at this point. It's sometimes it's just like, oh yeah, 50 is old. How did I get to that age? But then I'm like super thankful because I'm going to be 50 and I got lots of living to do, right? And so it's I don't know if I didn't find turning 40 hard. I didn't find my 40s hard. Um, and I hope I don't find my 50s hard because I feel like I feel like I'm going to be okay. I The life that I have here has necessitated at times that I really worry about what people think, but not in the way that people would expect, right? So it's not, oh, I please everybody because I don't want people to think badly of me. I often will take in what and it sticks with me because I find it really important to have people's perspectives when making decisions, right? And being an empathetic leader in my
Mm.
mind is being a well-rounded leader because sometimes I have to make tough decisions in my work or with counsel, but regardless of how it's going to affect people. But if I can have that in my head and have other people's perspectives, then I find I can always make a much more well-rounded, much better decision than I could if I ignored all of those things. So I do worry what people think, not necessarily of me, and to be honest with you, less and less so about what people think of me. But I do worry about what people think from a perspective of trying to make good decisions and sound decisions based on the information that I have in front of me.
Yeah, no, and I can relate to that big time because when you're faced with making decisions for a group, it's not, you're trying to be as equitable as possible, right? You're trying to hit the bliss point, if you will, and you have varied opinions and varied perspectives and very just needs, wants, and asks, and you just can't meet them all. You just can't meet
No.
them all. So, and then when you're, especially in your role, in a public role, and you're in of service, is people are always scrutinizing, right? They're always maybe trying to question how you arrived at your choices and your
Yeah.
decisions. And you brought up a word that is at the core of everything that I do, and even comes up in my leadership training. I touch on empathy versus sympathy. And empathy, right? It's from the Greek to suffer with.
Mhm.
And and I love when I have definitions to certain words because sometimes people have a hard time defining, oh, what's empathy? And I'll ask the group, and they're not quite sure how to connect with that, right? Depending on our level of comfort with feeling, right? So I appreciate that. And that also makes you a great leader because great leaders have that at their core. The other thing that you mentioned was about being 32 and then, all in your mind, which is great. Hey, if it works, it's a good anchor for you, man. That's awesome. Keep it. Now, when I turned 50, I wasn't sure. When I was on the cusp of turning 50, I was like, I don't know. What is that like? It kind of seems old. And actually, I think I actually really love it. But when you said when you're like 50, when you were younger, you look at your parents or friends' parents and 50, you're like, that's old. I remember being 13, doing the math on the year 2000, how old I would be. And I was like, I'm going to be 28 years old. I was like, wow, 28.
I
It's
know.
2022, right?
Yeah.
So this little things, little mind games you play with yourself, but then you're there and you go, huh, that's not so bad. But it comes back to when you do live your life intentionally, it's rich at no matter what age. right? And especially if you have people who are there along the way sharing in those experiences with you. Now, that's on purpose. Everything I'm saying here is on purpose and leading up to the question of legacies. Now, is a legacy important to you, right? But what is that? Because people have a different idea of what a legacy should be for themselves, right? I look at it as, I've always used the analogy for myself, it's kind of like I pass away and I've left a bookshelf on the wall. And how far apart are those bookends holding those books, right? How many volumes of books have I left behind with all the people I've worked with, all the people I've, embedded myself into their goals and their successes and their aspirations, and assisting them on getting them there every day, doing a little thing, something kind for someone, or just recognizing something. So like a legacy for me is critical. It's critical. What about for you? What does it mean for you?
Um, it's an interesting question for me because, I sometimes, in those nights when I'm all alone and I'm having those thoughts where I'm like, have I done enough with my life? Because there are many times when I feel like I have not done enough for those around me, right? And I think, well, I didn't have kids, right? So I'm not leaving behind anyone or anything. And that sometimes I'll be honest that I have those twinges of sadness over that. And then I think, I mean, listen, I've been I've been on TV for 9 years. I've been in more newspaper articles than I can count. I've worked in more places and been part of once in a lifetime activities and events here in the region. So I mean, from one of those 15 minutes of fame perspectives, I've had it absolutely, and hope to live a life as I continue with many more of those moments, not for the fame piece, but more for those memories piece. But my my legacy that I think of most often that I want to leave behind is that when people think of me, they think, she was a hard worker and she did the best she could for the people around her. And that's what I want to leave behind. And that's why sometimes when I'm tired and it's 4 o'clock in the morning and we're cleaning the event grounds between the pub on Friday night for the Irish Festival and the pub on Saturday, or the family activities on Saturday morning. And I've been working for, 4 days straight at 20 hours a day. That's what I want most to leave behind, is that somebody will say when my name comes up, she did the best she could for the people around her, and that's the piece that I hope to leave people with. Um, because that's what matters. That's what matters to me more than anything is I get my energy and my satisfaction and my feeling of worth from doing the best I can uh, in most situations, and working as hard as I can so that something good happens for myself and for the people around me.
Veronique,
Mhm.
spectacular. And you clearly achieve that because you're leading with that. That's another intention, right? That legacy that's in your mind when you say, when you've gone, she did the very best to impact, contribute in all these different ways that you're attached to, in the way that you're engaged with the people in your life. And it makes me think, I wrote it down real quick because it makes me think of a quote I like, and it's from Plato. And it says, he says, present yourself in the way you wish to be seen. And I always say that to myself. So present yourself in the way you wish to be seen. And that for me is also that legacy piece. And it's an interesting segue into I guess the final topic, which I'd like to touch on with you. We've layered along the way. We reached out and touched on it. We talked about anxiety and anxiety attacks and triggers and all that stuff. And before we were live, we were in the studio and we were discussing mental health. And as I listened to you so far, and time is literally passes so quickly talking to you. It's just such a blessing to have this time with you. Is your legacy, what you're doing in the community, the role that you play, council, how much of all of that and then your legacy is to impact mental health, issues and potentially struggles. I'd love to hear more of that.
So it's interesting. Years ago, I was the president of the Schizophrenia Society. And that was in the times when I really didn't understand how people could struggle with mental health, right? Although I understood diagnosable illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar and things like that, I really just, I struggled to understand people with depression and how they could so despair that they wouldn't understand that, you know, somebody was there to help them, right? So before I developed anxiety, and I remember I used to travel around as the president of the Schizophrenia Society, and I would speak to workplaces and businesses and groups, and I would talk about mental illness and mental health and how much we didn't talk about it and how stigmatized it was and how much, you know, those stereotypical portrayals in the movies really didn't do us any good. Because I would say, you know, if I broke my leg tomorrow, people would bring me food. They would, you know, send cards. They would offer to run my errands. They would do everything that they could do until I was better, right? But if I declared tomorrow on social media that I had been diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar or whatever, then you get the ooh, right, from most people because they don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
They don't know that it's, you know, an illness just like anything else. So fast forward, you know, I went through my own struggles as we talked about, and I started really understanding how many of my friends and colleagues and people in the community in general were struggling with mental health. The pandemic has certainly brought that more to the forefront than anything else, where we see much more talk around it. You know, but it was really important for me to start talking about it on a daily basis, for people to be able to connect with other people that they saw, to know that they had also struggled. And you know, I didn't want it just to be a hashtag once a year, and it's great
Mm,
that you know, the company does that. And it's become a thing, right? Everybody tweets and all of that just to get that rolling, but we don't talk about it the rest of the year. And so last year when I decided to run for city council, I took what I thought was a real chance at the time and said, when I get elected, I want to work on having a mental health strategy at the municipal level. It is not a municipal concern in the fact that municipal government does not administer mental health services, right? It's a provincial responsibility. But I knew, having done a lot of research around it, that communities that municipalities that make that a key part of how they function, that a strategy is in place, are able to help the local organizations come together a lot more efficiently, be a voice to provincial and federal governments when it comes to mental health services, because we know there are not enough of them, and make an impact. So I talked about that during the campaign, and the campaign last year for us was entirely virtual because we were in the midst of COVID.
yeah.
Right. And so every day I did different videos on what I wanted to talk about and what I wanted people to know about me, because people just knew that I was a volunteer for the most part. But I wanted people to understand why that was going to help make a difference on city council, or why my failed business was going to help make a difference on city council, and why having a mental health strategy at the municipal level was going to help our community in ways that they didn't anticipate. So I did manage to get elected, and then we were putting together our strategic plan, my colleagues and I. So my 7 fellow councillors and our mayor, we were putting our strategic plan for how our next 4 years was going to unroll, and I brought that up. And I remember our city manager, and God love him, because it was what everybody else was thinking. He just said it. And he said, this doesn't fit to me with everything else that we're talking about. Like, we're talking about economic development, we're talking about, active transportation and wellness and all of these things. And so the strategic advisor said, Veronique, do you want to talk about what you see here? And so I kind of outlined where I saw us fitting as a municipality. So not providing services, but absolutely supporting the services that are out there, coordinating, coming together, having a plan, but also providing education, right, around mental health. So anyway, so then the strategic advisor said, really, actually, if you can manage to do all of this, you'll be at the forefront of, be one of a kind, really. Now, there are some larger municipalities, like Calgary has a municipal strategy around mental health. So does Toronto, but large, right? So anyway, so they all nodded and said, yeah, good job, Bernie, And then budget time came, and I said, I want to put some money in the budget around this. Like, I don't want this to just be a thought. I want this, we need some action around this. And so my colleagues, God love them, because they were tired of hearing from me, but they still listened, and they were still open. It wasn't part of their normal conversation or their regular day-to-day conversation, but they listened to me, and they were willing. And so we did adopt it in the budget this year, like last year. And then I partnered with someone who has done an incredible amount of work at the school district level. And we're going to actually move forward with that strategy and providing education on mental health literacy. So learning how we spot those things in our friends, not so that we can provide counseling, but so we can say, you know what, I think Bob is struggling. Let me say, Bob, what can I do for you? And Bob says, you know what, I need some help. Great. Let's go find you some help. Let's go find the people that can do the best work for you. So that's all coming together. And that was a huge piece for me, because the more we talk about it, you, Steph, as a man, to be able to talk about mental health is huge, right? Because you are a role model for others out there. Right? People tend to associate mental health and being able to talk about it with women because we're squishy and soft and emotional, right? It's just as hard for me to still talk about it even to this day, but it is so critical because we are struggling. Our people are struggling. New Brunswick has a higher than the Canadian average rate of suicide, and Miramichi has a higher still rate of suicide than New Brunswick does. We need to talk about it, and we need to find ways to support our people. And mental health is everybody. It's your cousin, it's your sister, it's your brother, it's your coworker, it's your mom, it's your dad. It's everybody. We all have those moments, and the more we can talk about it, the more it will make a difference, more than once a year.
100%, and especially, more than that once a year. And I appreciate you, putting it that way, because I'm a funny bird. The way I view the world, and I see it as it should be. And, it's I liken it to, people will kind of recirculate or cut and paste a meme, and something that's, very motivational. It's a quote or something, you see it all over Facebook, and it's just like, whoop, share, boom. But I always go, that's easy. Are you actually doing something? Are you rolling up your sleeves? Are you doing something to impact that, whatever that is? And speaking to mental health versus a hashtag once a year saying, oh, everybody's do share, or they change even their picture on Facebook to I'm supporting this. Okay, that's nice that visually you're
Absolutely
plastering the awareness of something, but what are you doing every day to make a difference, right? And I see people real quick. I can see when something's going on, and and I'm sharing that because, and thank you for, yes, for typically for men, they don't openly share in the way that I do. I do it because I believe it's important. I had to work getting past some of that stigma myself early on. I was very embarrassed and what people thought of me, and is he fragile? And over the years I'd get, are you okay? And are you oh, and I'm like, yeah, okay. But making that awareness and you pioneering at your level is, I applaud you. And it takes a lot more people like you to push through and get, because like you said, you can make it an agenda item. And unfortunately, things take money. for things got to get propped up financially, right? So it's kind of like, hey, you can have a beautiful plan, but we have to execute, and let's execute. And what I really appreciated is how you opened it up and you framed it with a broken leg, right? So a broken leg, flowers, whatever, people, because they know, well, Veronique's leg eventually is going to mend, is going to heal, and she'll be whole again, normal. But
Yep.
for me, having had, challenges and struggles along the way in my life with mental health, is people see it as they're afraid, they don't want to touch it or be near it, because it's like, people, Veronique, if they feel they can't fix it, they shrink away. They just run the
Yep.
other way. It's like, I can't fix that. I want to be anywhere around it. It's terrifying to them. Whereas a broken leg, yeah, here's your cast for 6 to 8 weeks, whatever, good, and it's normal. But it's the unseen things like schizophrenia. I had a client in Ottawa when I was strength and conditioning, and she ran group homes for schizophrenic adults, and that was the first time I got to learn, quite intimately what went with all of that. And her name was Janie, I think. I'm trying to remember, it goes back a long time. But I said, I don't know if I could be that person to do what you do and put yourself in
Yeah.
front of such situations. And but that's the thing, is that educational piece you spoke to, is don't put it on yourself or worry that whether it's you to fix it or not. It's just to raise awareness. Like you said, hey, I think Bob
Hmm.
might be needing a boost, might be needing some help, and taking the opportunity to try and extract that, and then put an opportunity in front of Bob to try and get through it. So, oh, your work must be challenging, but extremely satisfying, because at your level you can influence. We talked about being able to influence, and clearly have with things that you feel are very important in your community. So you're inspiring. You're very inspiring, Veronique, and your
Thank you.
community and the people in your life are lucky to have you. I genuinely mean that. So usually the way we round the show off, um, I'm going to be listening to this show a few times over again. I always do that. I always like to go back and just listen and then extract nuggets and make notes and all that good stuff. If you wanted to leave, I always ask the guests to leave the audience with like one or two anchors, like these nuggets of to walk away with as a thing from you to anybody who will listen to this, in the future. What would that be? What would you like to say to wrap it up?
Um, Part of it, especially around the mental health pieces, I really do have to give credit to my colleagues around the table, the other counselors. This isn't their wheelhouse, right? This isn't their thing. They're not as passionate about it as I am, in that they know that there's an issue and they know it needs to be addressed, but they weren't quite sure, where they fit, but they were still open. They did it anyway, right? They embraced it, they listened to me, and they were open to that conversation. So I really have to give it to them, and that leads into the rest of it, is that, sometimes it's not our thing, and sometimes we're not passionate about it, but we can still affect it, and we can still be part of that solution. And the biggest thing that I take away every day, that I try to work on every day, is how I talk to myself, and those words that we use, and we talked about a few of them earlier. Um, those words that I use with myself, and try and cut myself some slack in not always getting it right, not always knowing how to do everything right the first couple of times or the first time, not always being an expert at it. But we have a lot of grace for other people, right? We have a lot of
Mhm.
grace for people who are just starting out. When someone starts new at work, we give them the time they need to get up to speed, to learn what they need to do. We don't always have that same grace for ourselves, and I think that's something that I work on every day, is cutting myself a bit of slack. And I don't mean, just giving up and doing nothing, or not working on whatever it is, but realizing that I still have a lot to learn, and that knowing that I need to find people that are smarter than I am, in order to progress and to get better. So some of the, allow yourself to be new at something, whatever it may be. If it's knitting that sweater, you'll get the same high as I got running along the canal, right? It doesn't have to be death defying. It just has to be something that you want to do and you accomplish it. So realizing that you can be new and doing it anyway, realizing that you may never be good at it. I am never going to be a great actress, and I know that, but I still did it and I loved it. It was terrifying, but whatever. And just realizing that there's a lot of living left to do. I have a lot of friends. I've actually had 5 friends lose a parent in the last 2 weeks in one way
Wow.
or another,
Oh man.
and there's a lot of living left to do, and no matter what age you're at, and just embracing that as much as I can, and realizing that my work is important, but it's a means to an end at the end of the day, and that what I do with my life is what matters most at this point, and doing the best I can with it.
That is a great closing message, Veronique. And that cutting yourself some slack, I call that looking softly in the mirror. You got to learn to look softly in the mirror at times, right? And like you said, yeah, we give, graces to people, we give them opportunities, and we tend not to do that for ourselves, and that self-talk. And it kind of ties into, when you talk about your colleagues, and, it wasn't their jam per se, but, they kind of got on board and they supported. But I think a lot of that was due to your approach. I think a lot of it is who you are and how genuine you are as a person, because being success and having people get on side for things is largely due to how you approach that conversation. So I can tell you have a knack for that. And in the same breath, it ties into also the approach that we need to have with ourselves too. That's what I get out of what you just kind of finished with. So, like I say to all my guests, thank you. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you for taking time out of your life to share so candidly and so honestly about some very personal things. And as well, it's a gift. I walk away feeling exhilarated from.
Well, thank you. I think it's amazing what you're doing with your gifts. So it's, to have the platform and to open it to those around you, and allow those conversations to happen is quite something. So yeah, thanks.
No, likewise, cuts both ways. Well, we'll have to do something else down the road again if ever there's an interest. So that being said, so for anybody who was tuning in and watching, thank you very much. And Veronique, I'm sure we'll be crossing paths again.
Thanks, Steph.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you. Cheers.